So we went to the screening. Now, this was the year, as you rightly said, of the hospital drama. And it was either ER or Chicago Hope. We've got to bid for both because we've got to get one of them. But we probably should veer towards ER because it's more character-based and that felt more Channel 4. So we made a bid on that. And Warner said, well, thank you very much for the bid on that. But, we've got a lot of other bids too. So you're going to have to do better. You're going to have to take Friends. We said, Friends? Now, Friends, we didn't even watch the complete episode. If we have to take it, we have to take it. But it ain't going to go beyond one season. And Warner said, well, don't you want to take sort of 2 seasons? Because we bid for 2 seasons of ER. We said, no, we'll just take the 1 season. We got ER, BBC got Chicago Hope, Happy Days, and we got this bloody sitcom called Friends. So sitcom called Friends was a monster hit, sort of straight out the bloody gates for both NBC and indeed for Channel 4. Oh, shit. We didn't see that coming. When it came round to renewing ER, and Friends, we were absolutely skinned by Warners, and rightly so, because it's a marketplace. But we were wrong. And that, in some ways, is the great things about television, isn't it? You sort of think, that has all the smell of a hit about it, and it's not a hit. And then something that you don't even watch all the way through is a global monster. And, and even now, and this is a truism, and I'm sure it's probably the same for your kids. My eldest, who's now 15, and it was a couple of years ago, watched every episode of Friends and then tells me, it's this great show. Have you seen it? I go, yeah, it's Greg Dyke, who was putting together the consortium pitching for the license. He just came up to me and said, you should be director of programs. Come and do this. Start something new. It'll be a laugh. And what was interesting to me was this was going to be, quite clearly, this was the last ever terrestrial free-to-air channel broadcaster. So you'd be starting something new. And I said to Greg, well, you know what? I'm actually quite happy at Channel 4 and I'm sort of only 2 and a bit years in. And I think there's a lot more that I can do here. He said, you'll never get an opportunity like this again. And he said, I'll give you some money. I will give you a sign-on fee if we can use your name in the bid. And I said, okay, how much would he give me? He said, 25 grand. And I happened to live in a chapel. And our stained glass windows were leaking like buggery. And I had to have them all rolled out and re-cemented. And it had to be done by hand. It listed building, blah, blah, blah. And it was going to cost just under 25 grand. I thought, well, that covers the cost because I didn't have the money to cover the windows. So I thought, well, who knows whether they'll win or not anyway. I'll continue at Channel 4, happy days there. And if they do, well, it's a big new adventure. And I remember I was literally hopping on a plane to go to RTE. Greg said, great news. We've won the license. You better resign from Channel 4. And I said, because I honestly didn't think they were going to get it. What happens if I don't want to come? He said, well, you've got to give us 25 grand back. I thought, we can't do that because my stained glass windows are no longer leaking.
It's the final episode of season 1 of the Big Swing podcast. So settle in because I've got a special treat for you. If you've been following along for the whole season, and I know you have, you'll already know that my name's Sam Barcroft and that I started my media business from my back bedroom in Tottenham and built it into a global content company, selling it in 2019. I know just how tough the entrepreneurial path can be because I lived that complicated, bumpy, high-stakes life for 16 years. And that's why I now help other entrepreneurs to scale their media businesses. Sign up for my weekly newsletter at creativille.co and join me and other media experts as we explore what the future of the media industry has in store for us. Or check out previous episodes of the Big Swing podcast to learn from the inspiring stories of other hugely successful content creators. And stick around to the end of this episode to hear not only my reflections from this week's conversation, but what it's like for me to get back in the content seat and start a podcast from scratch. I'll reveal my expectations, the realities, and the valuable lessons I've learned at the end of the podcast. And today, for the special finale episode of this first season of the Big Swing podcast, I've invited a luminary of the media industry, a giant of the executive suite, and an unrivaled trailblazer, the amazing Dawn Airey. Dawn was ITV's first ever female genre controller and ran arts and entertainment for Channel 4 before becoming the inaugural director of programmes for Channel 5, a station she would later helm as CEO and chair of the board. She went on to hold senior positions at ITV and Yahoo before landing the top job at Getty Images in New York, where I first met her back in 2016. Dawn's vast experience is sought out by the world's leading companies, and she's served on the boards of Thomas Cook, the UK Film Council, EasyJet, the British Library, and is currently chair of the board for both the National Youth Theatre and the Football Association's Women's Super League and Championship. As you can imagine, choosing just 3 big swings from such an amazing career would be impossible. There are just too many juicy stories. So Dawn and I have selected just a few which we hope will be useful to you on your entrepreneurial journey. So let's begin at the very beginning.
So listen, I'm a Lancashire lass. You know, I come from the not so glamorous Preston. My parents were both Scousers and lived in Liverpool. My dad ran his own design practice, so we moved down to the southwest, which is where I was educated, both comprehensively, and then had a very nice bit in a public school, although I hated that school. Then I went to university, Cambridge, and I had to sort of think about what I was going to do. But I sort of knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be involved in storytelling, and I also wanted to be involved in news and current affairs. So I applied to the BBC. I thought I'd get in. I had a sort of what I consider to be a pretty perfect CV. First big blow. First big career blow. Very, 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 very high standard of applicants for trainees that year. And I was told to reapply the next. So I thought, screw you. And I better apply to other television companies. So I applied to ITV. This was back in sort of the mid-80s. And I applied to all of the big 5 ITV companies. And Central Television were the first to say, okay, come and have a series of interviews. And I did. And I joined their trainee scheme. And it was a great trainee scheme. It was really up to you to find your own opportunities, but you were exposed to every aspect of the business, which was a great, great, great foundation. But I was always very clear. I want to work in the news and current affairs department. And I never got that because my boss, Andy Allen, said, no, you're really good at entertainment. You're going to go do shiny floor shows. So I was attached to Price is Right, $64,000 Question, Blockbusters, Classmates. And every time I had my review with Andy, I go, still really want to be in news and current affairs and you haven't got me there. And he said, you know what? The thing you're really good at, Dawn, is sort of working out where you want your show scheduled. Have you ever thought about being a scheduler? And I said, well, what's a scheduler? And he said, well, you decide what times things go out. And I said, that sounds really dull to me. And he said, actually, it's a lot of influence because you are deciding with me what shows we make and where they go. And I said, that's not what I want to do, Andy. Not what I want to do. And here is a dirty, guilty secret. He said to me, well, I'll double your salary. And I said, well, that sounds very attractive, but it's not attractive enough. And it's not a negotiation. I want to be working as a producer in the current affairs department. And he said, what about a company car? Now, that happened to be when my Peugeot 106 was keep breaking down. I said, what company car? He said, you can have whatever you want. So I said, can I have an XR2? And he said, yeah, you can have an XR2. So I had this brand new XR2. But the day I took delivery of it and parked it in the NCP, at the end of the day I went to get it, it'd been nicked. So there we are. So really, my career started and I became a controller of planning because of an XR2 that was nicked the same day I took delivery of it. So that's how I got into telly. Wonderful Andy Allen, who I absolutely adore and was a genius. And, that started me in this wonderful, wonderful world, which broadcasting and production is.
Dawn was incredibly lucky to have found such an amazing mentor as Andy so early in her career. Mentors are crucial to fostering success. They help you to sort the wood from the trees when making those key decisions. And one of those decisions that Dawn faced was whether to follow her heart and do what she loved, news and current affairs, or do what she was good at. Andy saw where Dawn's talents lay and what her long-term potential could be, and he helped to set her on a path to success. And so when ITV Network Centre was launched to coordinate all their regional stations, Andy sent Dawn down to London to work at the heart of the action. But being one of the very few women in a corporate giant of broadcasting was tough. Leaving Birmingham for London and learning to be comfortable with uncomfortable situations was Dawn's first big swing.
Television in general in the 80s was life on Mars. It was a very different world to the world it is today. And my kids today say, when I tell them some of the horror stories, and there are horror stories, when you look at it through the lens of today, and it wasn't right then and we knew it, well, why did you put up with that, Mum? We just wouldn't put up with that shit. And I said, you know what? The world has changed and it's changed for the better. I was pretty much throughout my career, and I'm glad to say I don't see this in broadcasting now, invariably the youngest, almost always the only woman. And I was the rump of a lot of very sexist jokes and subject to things that today I think most people, well, you wouldn't put up with, you wouldn't do. And there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't be in their jobs if they did what they did and said what they said then. And the way I sort of navigated through it all, I can be a bit, I can be a little bit laddish if needs be. I prefer not to be. But the way I sort of forged my furrow, I suppose, was by making sure that I really, really, really knew the business. So when I went to planning meetings, I knew the schedules back to front. I knew the performance of everyone's shows. I knew why I needed my show where I wanted it. Now, I was different and I tried to be better just through sheer hard work. And actually, hard work is sort of, again, one thing that often isn't spoken about, but I've always been, and I always look for, really significant endeavour.
Really interestingly, Andy Allen then pushed you out of Central, didn't he? And kind of pushed you out of your comfort zone again by sending you to London, where you kind of, when ITV was turning back into one big mass organisation, there you found yourself in Network Centre, which must have been a real change.
I honestly thought that whatever career I would have would begin and end at Central. I was very, very, very happy there. It was an absolute powerhouse. We were producing Spitting Image, dare I say it, Crossroads in those days, Boone, Peak Practice. It was so goddamn exciting and busy. And it was a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And I had great colleagues. And Andy, this big Geordie, who was the creative director, the director of programs, managing director, was just the most wonderful, generous human being. He was working class Geordie who had this amazing job, but he just had a great brain. He had a great editorial sensibility. It was interesting, actually, because when I was recruited into Central, there were 4 of us for 3 traineeships, and we were all sent off to a behavioural psychologist and to be tested for a day. And I came back, and it wasn't revealed until my leaving day at Central that I was a high-risk candidate. And Andy said, I want to mentor her. And I was high risk, which said she'll either be fantastic or a bloody disaster. So be careful. But Andy said, look, I'm not going anywhere, I hope. And there's this thing called the Network Centre, which was set up in response to, I think, the 1990 Broadcasting Act, which said ITV was operating as a cartel, which it was. But you set a programme budget. It was carved up pretty much between the big 5 companies, of which Central Television was one. But it had to respond to this legislation. So it set up a separate commissioning and scheduling body, which was called the Network Centre. And there were various genre heads. And I went in as the first genre head for kids and daytime. And basically, it was easy. It was an easy job to do. So the things that work, you gave longer runs to. And then one thing I did, which I've always tried to do in my career, is try lots of new things. And if you try lots of new things, you're likely to be successful. And so I managed to get kids, which we were always being beaten by the BBC consistently, to beating the BBC. But Andy was the one who said, you have to leave. And I remember my leaving do and day, I drove home from Birmingham back down to my house in Oxford, and I literally cried the whole way and thought, what on earth has this man made me do? I don't want to leave Central. I love Central Television.
So the big swing of moving to Network Centre, kind of taking that uncomfortable option that Andy kind of pushed you into, is that something that you kind of learned at that time? You then used that muscle that you developed in that big swing from that point onwards a number of times, didn't you?
Yes, exactly. So Andy he just said, you've got to believe in yourself, Dawn, and you have the capability to do a lot of things. And you're really good with people. And that, television.
He was right, wasn't he?
Any business.
He was spot on. I think sometimes you can see some things in younger colleagues, and you've probably had this experience where you see a younger colleague and you think, oh my God, they're on a rocket ship to Mars. And if they're 27 and they haven't worked anywhere else, they don't know that yet, do they? And he must have got great pleasure in turning around and seeing young Dawn absolutely smashing it, making him look fantastic for taking a risk, because he was absolutely spot on. His prediction has come entirely true, hasn't it?
Yeah, but he was very special, very, very, very special to me. And I sort of still miss him to this day, as lots of people do.
Dawn's next big swing comes from 1994, in her next job as Controller of Arts and Entertainment at Channel 4. As well as commissioning new programmes from producers, Dawn also went to LA each year for the May screenings. This was when studios would show off their new programmes for buyers from all around the world. For Dawn, the pressure was on to bag the biggest US hits from under the noses of the BBC.
Channel 4 was always known then for being a really good picker of US content, and US programming was really important and distinctive, and actually not many channels were that interested in it. So it's my second year of the May screening, and very, very nice to go from, Central Television and staying at the Holiday Inn Express to staying in the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, thinking, oh yeah, this is a piece of all right, thank you very much. So we went to the screenings, and Warner Brothers, because we're the British buyers, and British buyers traditionally have paid sort of good money. We get our own little screening room. And, Warner's are spectacular at client relationships. So we go and we sit down. And the great thing about having your own screening room, of course, is you don't have to watch the whole episode. You go, I want to see this, this, and this. Now, this was the year of the hospital drama. And it was either ER or Chicago Hope. And whatever it was, we had to have the hospital drama. But the BBC also wanted the hospital drama. So we'd seen Chicago Hope, which was extraordinary. It was a pilot that involved the separating of Siamese twins. It was unbelievable drama, and it was absolutely captivating and brilliant. And then we saw ER. And ER was, again, brilliant drama. Nothing quite as extraordinary as separating Siamese twins. But when you set that bar as that high, you know that Chicago Hope are going to struggle to continue having that level of drama. But ER was different. It was more character-led. So when we thought about it, we thought, of the two, we probably should veer towards ER because it's more character-based and that felt more Channel 4. So we made a bid on that, and Warner said, well, thank you very much for the bid on that. But, we've got a lot of other bids too, so you're going to have to do better. You're going to have to take Friends. We said, Friends? Now, Friends, we didn't even watch the complete episode. And so we thought, oh, well, I suppose if we have to take it, we have to take it. But it ain't going to go beyond one season. And Warner said, well, don't you want to take sort of 2 seasons? Because we bid for 2 seasons of ER. We said, no, we'll just take the 1 season. And so that's what we did. So a sitcom called Friends was a monster hit, sort of straight out the bloody gates for both NBC and indeed for Channel 4. Oh, shit. We didn't see that coming. And then, of course, when it came round to renewing ER, and Friends, we were absolutely skinned by Warner's, and rightly so, because there's a marketplace. And that, in some ways, is the great things about television, isn't it? You sort of think, that has all the smell of a hit about it, and it's not a hit. And then something that you don't even watch all the way through is a global monster.
And really it proves the adage that nobody knows nothing, don't they, when it comes to arts and entertainment at some level. When you're presented with 2 brilliant things, who knows which one is going to capture the attention at that moment in that way. So it's a great truism, though, that if you take enough shots, you're going to score more goals than anyone else. And I think by buying the shows, you actually insulated yourselves without realising it against the risk, because you could try both of those things out rather than one of them. And so you won, despite the fact you had a funny route to the win.
I always go back to, I don't remember that novel, A Year in Provence by Louis Malle, which was sort of top of the bestseller list forever. And then the BBC said, okay, we're going to produce a drama of A Year in Provence. And it was cast with John Thor, he doesn't do anything wrong. John Thor was God as an actor, always picked the right shows. The show was an absolute, just didn't work. It was pretty much a bird for Christmas. And you sort of think, wow, how did that happen? BBC, great production, really good strips. It just didn't resonate and work. And that's the magic of telly, isn't it, really?
Dawn's next move perfectly illustrates how she's always open to opportunities, always ready to take a calculated risk with the people she likes, and maintains a brilliant sense of fun and perspective. This is how Greg Dyke convinced Dawn to leave Channel 4 and become Channel 5's first ever Director of Programmes.
He just came after me and said, you should be Director of Programmes, come and do this, start something new, it'll be a laugh. I really like Greg, and Greg had always been one of the really kind directors of programmes to me when I was sort of growing up in telly in my Central days. And I was intrigued, and I thought, And what was interesting to me was this was going to be, quite clearly, this was the last ever terrestrial free-to-air channel broadcaster. So you'd be starting something new. So I I thought, God, it's an enormous challenge. And I said to Greg, well, you know what? I'm actually quite happy at Channel 4, and I'm sort of only 2 and a bit years in, and I think there's a lot more that I can do here. He said, you'll never get an opportunity like this again. And he said, I'll give you some money. And I said, right, what do you mean you give me some money? He said, I'll give you a sign-on fee if we can use your name in the bid. And I said, okay, how much would he give me? He said, 25 grand. Now, 25 grand in whenever it was, 1994 or whatever, was a lot of money. And I happened to live in a chapel. And our stained glass windows were leaking like buggery. And I had to have them all rolled out and re-cemented. And it had to be done by hand. It listed building, blah, blah, blah. And it was going to cost just under 25 grand. I thought, well, that covers the cost because I didn't have the money. So I thought, well, who knows whether they'll win or not anyway. I'll continue at Channel 4, happy days there. And if they do, well, it's a big new adventure. And I remember I was literally hopping on a plane and Greg said, great news, we've won the license. You're going to be, you better resign from Channel 4. And I said, because I honestly didn't think they were going to get it. What happens if I don't want to come? He said, well, you've got to give us 25 grand back. I thought, well, you can't do that because my stained glass windows are no longer leaking. So I thought, oh, right, okay. So I thought, bloody hell. So I went to tell Michael Grade. He was obviously the chief executive. I told John, and he said, go and tell Michael. He was not happy with me at all. Anyway, he wrote in my leading card, Channel 5 will go down the pan, but I hope you come up smelling the roses. Well, Channel 5 didn't go down the pan, and I did go. And it was great. A lot of people piss all over Channel 5. Less so now, because Ben and Viacom are doing a very, very, very fine job. But we attracted a very young audience, took it from 0 to 6.5% share in 4 years. And it went from 0 to £1 billion pounds in value in that time. And we did do something different, and we appealed to a younger audience. We had a different relationship with independence, which was never going to be rich out of Channel 5. But what we will do is we'll experiment. We'll be very respectful of you. We'll cash flow your productions, and we'll give you quick and honest answers.
As Channel 5's first ever Director of Programmes and then CEO and Chair of the Board, Dawn helped to build a £1 billion business from scratch. And her savvy with creatives and a nose for content soon attracted the attention of even bigger businesses across the pond. Having conquered television, for Dawn's next big swing, she decided to head to the USA to try a different industry. In 2013, Yahoo was a $36 billion business, and Dawn became its new Vice President for Europe, the Middle East and Africa.
Yahoo was the first search engine, and it also had its own content. And they're looking for somebody to head up their EMEA business. And they want to focus more on content. So they want somebody with a content sensibility, but somebody who's also interested in audiences. And that's the one thing about telly that I've loved, is fusing creativity with making money. And to do that, you've got to have a really acute interest in audiences, and not only understand what they've watched and what's motivated them previously, but have a bit of a glass ball that says, this is where I think things are going and where we need to make bets. And I thought, God, this is going to be fascinating. So I went to Yahoo, and it was like I'd landed on an alien planet, but it was fabulous. Yahoo had a great culture. I had an unusual boss, Marissa Meyer, who was a completely brilliant product engineer. She developed Google Maps. She was something like employee number 20 at Google. Quite brilliant. Hadn't been a chief executive of an organization quite so large and quite so complicated. But how the company ran itself and how the company assessed you was staggering, absolutely staggering. So it was very much command and control from the top. The CEO was present everywhere. And it's a bigger organization, like 50,000 globally. I mean, it's a massive number. But one thing it was really good at is how it assessed how you did. Was really interesting to me. So it was so rigorous around assessing its talent base. It's how good are you relative to? And so it had a very complicated system of appraisal. Now, I was used to a television appraisal, which was a good job, end of the year, there's 100% bonus, well done. This was, you had your KPIs. You were assessed on a quarterly basis. Your peers would comment on you. You had a boss, they would comment, and so would those be. You had a 360-degree review every 3 months. You were then calibrated relative to peers. So how were you doing relative to a SVP in another region or another division? And you were then remunerated based on performance. And there was also not quite a forced curve, but nearly a forced curve. So everybody couldn't be an outstanding performer. Well, I would argue everybody could be an outstanding performer if you're producing outstanding results. But no, there are outstanding performers. Then you would fall into various categories beneath that. And to be honest, you always wanted to be an excellent performer. You didn't even want to be on target because that would have repercussions in terms of what you were paid.
Is that quite a fear-based structure then, Dawn?
It's not fear-based. It's very rigorous, though. Very, very, very rigorous. I think it worked well, actually. And it works particularly well with a younger employee, with your centennials and millennials. They want feedback all the time. How am I doing? And Yahoo forced you to have conversations with your staff on a regular basis because you're only ever 6 weeks away from calibration, and you had to justify the marking of your senior and middle management to your peers, and your peers would have a comment on individuals. So it forced you to be collaborative, or at least understanding of the strengths and opportunities for growth of colleagues.
So it's time to recap Dawn's big swings. Which one did she feel was the most impactful for her? And which one has the lessons that she still carries forward to this very day? Was it number 1, learning to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable, to always try new things and leave the safety of Birmingham Central TV and her great mentor Andy Allen? Or was it number 2, totally missing the fact that Friends would be one of the greatest TV shows of all time and learning that great truism of media? When it comes to creative choices, whether you think you might know, it's always a gamble. Or number 3, that experience at Yahoo, learning that feedback, when done rigorously and properly, will accelerate your and your team's outcomes much more swiftly than anything else.
Good question. I don't do either. I try and do and. I would say all 3 have been really, really important. But I do think, as entrepreneurs, you are entrepreneurial because you try stuff, and entrepreneurs do fail. And I do think industry is really, really, really important, and a sense of perspective, because things will fail. Not everything will go right, but you learn. I learned more when I had to put a company into administration. I learned more when I was starting something new than actually when things are working just sort of well. For me, I think, being resilient and trying stuff and taking people with you. The one thing that I think is critical is you're always just a part of a team. You're always part of a team. So you've got to take your team with you. And I think that's about being transparent about motivations, what works, what doesn't work, saying, you can grow with this business. I'm always going to give you honest feedback, but you also equally, they can fail in the way that you can fail as well. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is only work. Only work. And so you need to enjoy it. You need to put people around you that you enjoy, and you need to get the best out of them. Because one thing Andy did say, the thing that probably has been most important to me, which is my career, which has been just a list of assignments. I've only been able to do what I've been able to do by getting the best of the teams that I've inherited or I put together. So employ giants and you'll get giant results. And I've never, ever, ever been threatened by actually having people who are far better than me, which is pretty much everybody I've worked with, working for me. So those are my, whatever it's worth, truisms, experience.
Well, it's worth a great deal, Dawn. I mean, I'm going to be really honest, you're one of the most inspiring people that I know, because you don't just talk a brilliant talk, you walk an absolutely astonishing walk at the same time. And I think the organisations that you work with now are so lucky to have even 10 minutes of your time a month, so I think they're all in very safe hands. And so thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's a pleasure to have this time with you.
Well, thank you. And that's very, very, very generous of you, Sam. I've always enjoyed, your company, and I've always found you as a bit of a soulmate. So, for everyone who's listening to this, it's these journeys, like I said, are never straightforward. You go with the twists and the turns and the rolls, but just enjoy it because it's fun. Life is fun.
And that was my conversation with the amazing Dawn Airey. And I'm sitting here on International Women's Day thinking about Dawn and what an incredible woman she actually is. She's just a perfect example of the mantra that if you believe it's possible, it probably is. Look at what she's done. She's gone from being a graduate trainee at a regional TV station to being the last person ever to launch a terrestrial TV channel in the UK. And she's gone on to run image companies, to be senior in a US tech company, and now to chair the boards of some of the most important cultural and sporting organisations in the UK. I'm a massive fan. And I think done with all that sparkling wit and humour and incredible intellect, what an amazing woman. So I took 3 things away from my conversation with Dawn. Number 1 is leveraging that feeling of being an outsider, because Dawn did feel like an outsider. She's probably felt like an outsider in many parts of her life, but you know, she was one of the handful of women in a school of boys. And that taught her how to deal with difficult men early on in her life. But all the way through, she was in a situation where being a powerful woman was unusual. But Dawn didn't find that a problem because she decided to leverage it. And if you are in a situation where you feel like you look or sound or act differently to others, there's a secret, which is to stop pretending and trying to be one of the people in the pack and decide to be bravely who you are and to put that front and center. And Dawn is an incredible example of how powerful that can really be. And I take a lot of inspiration from Dawn on that level. Secondly, Dawn teaches me how powerful fun is. The best thing about having a chat with Dawn is that it's always hilarious. I always learn something. But no matter how difficult things are, I remember seeing Dawn towards the end of her time at Thomas Cook when the company was in deep difficulty and now having daily board meetings to try and keep the company alive. She still had that wonderful spirit of life. She still was cracking jokes. She still was thinking about positive ways she could help the situation along. You know, so the power of fun and making sure those around you really feel like everything's fun and possible is brilliant. And Dawn does that better than pretty much anybody I've worked with. Thirdly, it's all about taking people with you. If you run an organization, you can, of course, achieve a lot of stuff on your own, but really you can't achieve very much unless you've got your team really focused on what you want to achieve and that they want to do it because they want to come with you on the journey that you're charting the course for. And I think what's wonderful about Dawn is she knows that she's only one human being and that if she really wants to achieve things, that she has to get all the people in an organization really excited and feeling like anything's possible and understanding what it is they can do to help on that mission. So taking people with you is the third lesson I've learned from Dawn. And what a remarkable woman and a person who I absolutely love having conversations with. So it's time to reminisce and to look back on the first season of the Big Swing podcast. Thank you so much for joining me every week for the last 16 weeks or so to hear the inspiring stories of other incredible entrepreneurs in the content game. It's been an absolute delight to make season 1 of this podcast. And I wanted to take you back through what we'd done so that we could learn from it and hopefully get a bit of inspiration flowing. So why did I make the Big Swing podcast? I'm sitting here looking after the farm with what looks like a really cushy life. What was missing? Why did I do it? Well, to be honest, I was lonely. I had work loneliness. I started the podcast as a reconnection experiment. And what I mean by that is I'm lucky enough to have a wonderful family and amazing friends and a local community here in the Golden Valley that I love being a part of. But I'd spent the last 20 years building an incredible network of people that I was lucky enough to work with and for. And I really missed being a part of that remarkable community. And so starting a podcast where I interviewed amazing leaders was a brilliant way to get back in contact with the people I really wanted to chat with again and be around. So I did what I always do with new projects, which is decide to partner with people who really were top of their game. I'd never made a podcast before. I'd written songs, I'd written articles, I'd produced photo essays, I had made videos, I'd created TV shows. I'd done a lot in the content world, but I'd never made a podcast. So what I decided to do was to partner with the best in the business. This is a really good tactic for people that are doing something new. Don't assume that it's worth you having to figure it all out along the way. Partner with people who are already really, really good at it. So, number one, I went and found myself a brilliant executive producer to run the show. Fred Casella is a super experienced executive producer, having earned his reputation through excelling in factual television. Fred also works on scripted and also makes the Exponential View podcast, which is one of my top 5 all-time podcasts. And he's addicted to the business of content and to this industry that we all work in. So he was the perfect choice to be our executive producer. Number 2, I knew I needed somebody to boss the post-production of this show. And so I turned to my amazing friends and colleagues at Spirit Studios in London. And they have a brilliant sound designer called Will Horrocks, who has turned this podcast from a middle-aged man talking into something that's full of amazing music and sounds wonderful. So thank you so much, Will, for your support as the sound designer on this show. And I also pulled in Lauren Airey, who's a top television and podcast producer who's been helping out by producing some of our episodes. So with a team like that, I was in amazing shape from the start. And Fred and I figured out the show. We hired an Airbnb in Maida Vale last summer and got the interviews going. And it was a bit scratchy at points. The technology let us down here and there, but it was such a brilliant journey and it was such a joy to work with somebody as experienced and talented as Fred. And what did I get out of making the podcast? Well, number one, the joy of being able to interact with everybody again. What a fantastic situation after COVID, after exiting my company, I had an excuse to work with amazing people again. And the second big thing was the excitement of making something, of feeling out of my depth to make a podcast, but doing it anyway. And of just figuring out those little knotty problems along the way and crafting the script and doing something again, re-recording a take, all that lovely stuff to make it really good. And what I've taken out of it is a few realizations. The first one is that good things take time. For me to learn to be a decent podcast host and producer, I have to build up understanding, through listening to other podcasts, through talking to great experts and understanding what works and what doesn't work, and really trying hard to become really good at what I do. And that just takes time. I just have to do it again and again and again. The other thing is growing a podcast community and an audience around the podcast is really difficult. There are millions of podcasts that have been released in the world, and there are hundreds of thousands that are still going strong, putting out episodes every single week. For the big swing to cut through, it needs to really super serve its community, and we need to make sure lots of people know about it. And that's something that I've realized is probably more than half of the challenge of making a podcast, is actually getting it out to people that might find it helpful. And also committing to a new business that has a direct income of zero is really tough for me as an entrepreneur. I like to make profitable businesses. That's what I've been striving to do for the last couple of decades. So the big swing as a free-to-air podcast costs money and I don't make anything from it. And that is a bit tricky from time to time. But what I've realized is it's all working for me, as the deeper mission of inspiring other entrepreneurs and supporting them to build their business is definitely being fulfilled. Well, how do I know that? Because of some brilliant messages and some wonderful interactions I've had with people who've fed back to me about how the stories that they've heard on the big swing have helped them through a difficult time, or have made them feel that something was possible that they didn't think might be, or people who've just really enjoyed the stories because they're great stories. And so that connects with me. That makes me think that my broader mission at Creatorville, which is to inspire entrepreneurs in the digital content space, is going really well, and it helps strengthen that. So we've decided we're going to take a little break for a while from the big swing so that everyone can get on top of their other projects, and also so we can have some rest and reflection. And I think it's always good to stop when you've been making something for a while and to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how you can improve it. So we'll be back with a fresh season as soon as we get into the joys of springtime in the UK. So thank you so much for listening. especially for your feedback and encouragement. It means the world to us. And if you've enjoyed season 1 of The Big Swing, please make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever. Please share it with somebody who might find it useful. And please feel free to email us your suggestions to thebigswing@creatorville.co. That's thebigswing@creatorville.co. Enjoy the rest of the winter, and here's to next season of The Big Swing. Thanks so much for listening to season 1. See you on the other side.